This is Newsday on the BBC. I'm Rico Hizon in Singapore. The headlines. The countdown to the Winter Olympics is almost over, but could a North Korean military parade upstage the celebrations? As Kim Jong-un sends his own sister to represent him at the Games, Japan warns the world not to be taken in by the North's charm offensive.
And I'm Sharon Jeet-Lail in London. Also on the programme, sci-fi sunglasses. Chinese police say their high-tech shades help spot suspects. And remember this, well, we catch up with the man behind the viral video that has just won the TV Moment of the Year.
Live from our studios in Singapore and London. This is BBC World News. It's Newsday.
Glad you could join us. It's 8 in the morning here in Singapore, midnight in London, and 8:30 a.m. in Pyongyang, where North Korea is preparing to display its military might. A parade is due to mark the 70th anniversary of the founding of its army, and according to one source, as many as 13,000 troops are practicing. This comes as the opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics, dubbed by South Korea's president as the Peace Olympics, is set to take place. For more, let's toss over now to the BBC's China correspondent Stephen McDonald, who joins us from Pyeongchang in South Korea, where the Olympics are set to take place. Thank you so much for joining us, Stephen. So much talk about this military parade that will be taking place across the border. What is the sentiment among South Koreans?
Well, you know, it's interesting. If you were North Korea and you were just about to achieve a major propaganda coup with your unexpectedly high level of engagement here at the Winter Olympics, what might you do today? I know, hold a big, scary military parade just across the border to remind everybody of your nuclear weapons program and the like. Now, it's probably the case that this was already locked in the North Korean schedule like a long time ago. As you mentioned, thousands of troops involved. But it does seem that they're trying to possibly try and play down this military parade, if that's possible, by not inviting foreign journalists to attend. So I think they're going to sort of, I guess, try and sneak it through and achieve as best a result as they can for the domestic consumption in North Korea, and hope that the rest of the world doesn't freak out too much that this military parade is happening the day before the opening ceremony here in Pyeongchang.
And the North Koreans want to make headlines. Kim Jong-un is sending his sister as part of the North Korean delegation to the Olympics.
Yes, the presence of Kim Yo-jong is going to be quite remarkable. You know, we're already seeing on the press here comparisons of her turning up and Ivanka Trump turning up to bookend the Olympics. So we are seeing a major propaganda showdown, I suppose, between the United States and North Korea here in Pyeongchang, with the Winter Olympics all going on in the background. Of course, there is the small problem for South Korea that some in this delegation, including Choi Hui, a senior North Korean figure, he's subject to United Nations sanctions, including a travel ban and also an assets freeze. If he's allowed into the country, technically, South Korea is in breach of UN sanctions. And so they're trying to work that through at the moment with the UN Security Council.
All right, thank you so much for updating us on the latest developments in Pyeongchang in South Korea. Stephen McDonald.
Well, Stephen was talking about military parades there in North Korea, but we'll have more on that later in the programme, and how President Trump wants to plan his own in Washington. But for now, let's take a look at another story coming out of the American Capitol. And senators have announced a 2-year budget deal to avoid a repeat of last month's government shutdown. The agreement could increase government spending by hundreds of billions of dollars, including on the military and infrastructure. But it does still need the approval of Congress and of the President. Well, earlier I spoke with our correspondent in Washington, David Willis, and I began by asking him whether this budget deal is likely to be approved by Congress.
That is the big question. We moved closer today to avoiding another government shutdown here. That bipartisan bill approved by the Senate, or agreed in the Senate anyway. It should be voted on tomorrow. Then it will go to the House before President Trump can sign it into law. And there is the rub, as Shakespeare would say, because there are Democrats in the House who want the same sort of agreement that Democrats in the Senate got from the leadership there. Namely, they want a commitment to have a follow-up bill on immigration that addresses the plight of the so-called dreamers. These are people we've been hearing a lot about recently. There's more than 1 million of them. They were brought to this country illegally through no fault of their own. The Democrats want to see them protected, and certainly in the House anyway, they were looking to tie this budget agreement, this two-year budget agreement, which would be quite something really, to the plight of the dreamers. Nancy Pelosi, the House Minority Leader, has been on her feet now for more than 7 hours. She's talking about the plight of the dreamers. It's not actually a filibuster, but she's certainly getting her point across. And in actual fact, she set a record a short while ago for the longest continuous speech since, I think, 1909.
And that was David Willis. Also making news today, rescuers in Taiwan are searching for people trapped after an earthquake struck the city of Hualien on Tuesday. At least 7 people were killed and 250 injured, but some 67 are still unaccounted for. Aftershocks continue to rattle the country, the strongest a 5.7 magnitude. Rescue efforts are being focused on buildings tilting precariously.
It is the most difficult part of the rescue, right here at Yan Sui building, because it's tilting by more than 50 degrees. So all our rescuers who are entering the building, if it collapses, all of them will be killed immediately.
The latest Syrian government airstrikes in the suburb of Damascus have killed more than 100 people since Tuesday, including many children. That's according to a British-based monitoring group. Eastern Ghouta has been under intensive bombardments recently, and this is the heaviest death toll in almost 2 months. The UN has called for a ceasefire. Chancellor Angela Merkel has promised a good and stable German government if a coalition deal she's struck with the centre-left Social Democrats is approved. She spent more than 4 months trying to form a government since inconclusive elections. The Social Democrats have promised party members a vote on whether to accept the deal. And you must recognize this is the iconic Eiffel Tower in Paris, but it's been shut, and that's after a cold snap blanketed the French capital in 6 inches of snow. Now, commuters have been trapped in their cars as authorities tried to clear the snow, but let's take a look at this because you can see some tourists there and locals having fun. They're making the most of the weather.
The world must not be taken in by the North Korea's charm offensive, and that is what the Japanese Foreign Minister Taro Kono told the BBC. He was speaking as relations between the two Koreas appear to be thawing ahead of the Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang. Mr. Kono told our Tokyo correspondent Rupert Wingfield-Hayes that sanctions are biting and are the only way forward.
For weeks, rumors have been swirling that the Trump administration is preparing a military strike against North Korea, a so-called bloody nose, to force Pyongyang to the negotiating table. Last month, these B-2 stealth bombers arrived at a US base on the island of Guam. But Japan's Foreign Minister Taro Kono told me such speculation should not be taken seriously. A military strike on North Korea is far too risky.
South Korea capital Seoul is situated just 30 kilometers from the border, and if any military actions taken, the repercussion is outrageous. So I don't think anyone's seriously considering taking a military method, but in order to get the North Korea come to the dialogue, I think we need to increase the pressure on them.
In his New Year message, North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un described the latest sanctions against his country as life-threatening. They include a ban on North Korean exports of coal, iron and seafood, and a cut on the import of oil. Mr. Kono says that shows they are starting to work.
Well, sanctions biting. Now we have a lot of indication the sanction is actually biting.
What do you think is going on with this sudden rapprochement over the Winter Olympics?
That's one of the indications the sanction is working. They wanted to do something, and they wanted to do a sort of charm offensive to South Korea. I think North Korea wants probably more, but I don't think international community ready to give them anything.
On Friday, North and South Korean athletes will walk side by side as the Winter Olympics opens in Pyeongchang. But Mr. Kono says the world must not be taken in by Pyongyang's charm offensive or intimidated by its growing missile threat.
If they use their missile or nuclear capability, they're going to be no more North Korea, and they know it. So they are just making a threat, but they're just sitting in the middle of the sanction, and eventually they run out of their resources.
So you're prepared to play a long game on this?
Yes, it is, yes. The sanction is not going to work in days or weeks. It takes months, and we just have to be patient, and we just have to be well coordinated, and that's the only way. The alternative is some kind of military action, which no one wants.
And that interview with Rupert Wingfield Hayes. And here's news just in. North Korea has said that it has no intention of meeting with U.S. delegates during the Winter Olympics. The U.S. Vice President had previously said he wouldn't rule out meeting North Korean officials during the Olympics. But this latest statement from Pyongyang states that there is no interest in dialogue with the U.S.
Now, police in China have started using sunglasses featuring facial recognition technology. Now, the glasses are linked to an internal database of suspects and allow officers to scan the crowds looking for suspects. The state says that the glasses have already helped police to catch 7 individuals, but there are fears that they could be used to track and profile political dissidents and ethnic minorities. There is also concerns about what this means for the further development of China's surveillance program. Well, earlier I spoke with the China director of Human Rights Watch about just how worrying this technological development is.
Yeah, these sunglasses look very Matrix or RoboCop, but I think the impulse is pure Orwell. Police in China are already extremely powerful, and we've documented their increasing use of different kinds of technology really to extend that power without any protections for ordinary citizens who may not even know that they're being surveilled, and even if they are, don't really have the ability to challenge that. And our concerns are that the police can, in fact, profile certain kinds of people, even if they haven't committed a crime.
Right, and of course, many of these are ethnic minorities, particularly in places like Xinjiang province, where the Uyghurs have been targeted. So there are other forms of surveillance they use as well, including DNA profiling. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, we learned earlier, or late in 2017, that under the guise of a free public health program, police across Xinjiang were gathering DNA samples from everyone between the ages of 12 and 65. You know, and again, people were given no justification. They weren't given the opportunity to opt out. They have no idea how their biodata is going to be used or stored by the authorities. And, you know, this violates a number of different human rights, not least, you know, that medical information in particular is really meant to be private. You know, this campaign is in no way linked to any kind of credible identified threat that would justify using such a broad-based and intrusive program.
Right. Now, you say China is, of course, violating human rights, but in terms of surveillance, if you take a look at the numbers, they've got an estimated 170,000 CCTV cameras watching people. However, if you look at countries like the UK, where I am, apparently estimates suggest there are about 5 million CCTV cameras watching people. So how is what China is doing any different from what more liberal Western societies are also doing?
Well, first of all, if you and I were in China, we wouldn't be having this conversation live on national television. We would not have the ability to challenge this. We would not have the ability to put any kind of limitation on how that data is actually used once it's been gathered. So I think there are enormous differences in how states, that do have an obligation to provide public safety, actually manage the use of these technologies.
And that was Sophie Richardson, the China director of Human Rights Watch, speaking earlier to Sharon. You're watching Newsday on the BBC, live from London and Singapore. Still to come on the program, the road back to Rakhine State. We report on the obstacles facing Rohingya refugees who return home to Myanmar.
And also on the program, keeping in step with the competition, Trump wants Washington to get its own military parade, but are officials in the Pentagon dragging their feet?
Welcome back, everyone. You're watching Newsday on the BBC. He's on in Singapore.
And I'm Sharon Jitlale in London. Thanks for staying with us. Our top stories. North Korea plans a large-scale military parade as the Winter Olympics are about to get underway across the border.
Japan's foreign minister says international sanctions against Pyongyang are starting to bite and will lead to talks on their nuclear program. And this story is popular on BBC.com. The Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's estranged wife has survived the fatal crash on a national highway. One of her relatives died when their vehicle collided with a truck in the western state of Rajasthan. Let's now take a look at some of the front pages from around the world, and we start off with the international edition of the Japan Times, and it is concentrating on the earthquake that hit Taiwan on Tuesday evening. There are some incredible pictures of partly collapsed buildings, including this one showing a massive crack on the road. Shifting our attention to the South China Morning Post Hong Kong edition, and it is following suit with the headline, "Life in the Balance." Rescuers don't know how many people are still trapped in this residential building. And Dubai's Gulf News is looking to the skies and at the SpaceX rocket launch. It is reporting the live video of the Falcon Heavy rocket taking off, and it was YouTube's second biggest live stream ever. The first was the Red Bull Stratus jump. And those are the key headlines of major publications around the world. And now, Sharon, what are people watching online?
Well, Rico, I'm sure you and many others remember this moment because it was one of the most watched videos of the year. Professor Robert Kelly was in the middle of a live interview with the BBC from his home in South Korea when his two children burst into his office. And they were, of course, followed shortly after by his wife, who tried to do a bit of damage limitation. Now, Professor Kelly's in London for the Broadcast TV Awards, and I can say he's just won the best TV moment of the year. And, of course, we couldn't let him come so close to our studios without getting him to talk to us again.
I don't actually think of myself as a celebrity or anything like that. I mean, I certainly didn't want this. I don't mind it. It's not bad. I mean, many people have sent us gifts and, wrote kind emails to us, and we've gotten a lot of communication about the video in the last year. But, I mean, it's not anything that we really sought. It's kind of like a strange, because I'm not really in that kind of profession. I'm not in the media business or anything like that. So it's kind of a weird moment. But, I mean, people, take photographs of me, getting out of my car and, buying milk at Costco. And, when I came through immigration, the immigration officer recognized me. I mean, it's weird. Yeah, everywhere you go, people are like, "You're that guy, right?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm that guy." And they ask, "Can I have a picture?" It's sort of bizarre. I mean, I don't actually know anything about being a celebrity, so.
Well, Professor Kelly is getting used to becoming a celebrity, especially now he's won the TV Moment of the Year award in London. Here he is, pictured with my colleague and presenter, James Menendez.
A big congratulations to him. Now, the British government's assessments predicting the possible economic impact of Brexit suggests that growth will be hit hardest in those regions where the Leave vote was strongest. The analysis drawn up for the Department for exiting the EU looked at scenarios ranging from leaving with no deal to remaining within the EU single market.
Here's a big question. Can they go back? Will the more than 700,000 Muslim Rohingyas who fled to Bangladesh last year ever return to Myanmar? Well, an agreement between the two countries for this to start was finalized last month, yet the obstacles to a large-scale repatriation are formidable. Our correspondent Jonathan Head has been in Rakhine State, where he sent us this report.
These old temples are all that's left of what was once a powerful Buddhist kingdom. They're a reminder to the Rakhine people, now some of the poorest in Myanmar, of how far they've fallen. And it's that sense of humiliating decline, a favourite theme of local politicians, which has stirred up a dangerous fear in the Rakhine of being squeezed on the one side by the Burmese state and on the other by a massive Muslim population.
5 years ago, they turned on their Muslim neighbours. Dozens died in this part of Rakhine. Many Rohingya communities were completely destroyed. The survivors confined by the government to squalid camps. This was the start of a bitter ethnic conflict which led to the flight of 700,000 refugees to Bangladesh last year. But their Rakhine neighbours have little sympathy. They have their own complaints. They blamed the government for their poverty. And they all had tales to tell of violent disputes with Muslims. We can't have them here, they said. And yet they remembered living together peacefully once. No one was sure why that had changed.
All the statues, all the Buddha images were...
Tun Ne Win works as a tour guide in the ruins. He's also a Rakhine political activist, fearful for the future of his community. I asked him if they could accept the Rohingya refugees coming back.
If we have to accept the Muslims in camp in Bangladesh now, they really need to follow the rules of law in our country.
So the existing laws, so they cannot be citizens.
There will be some Muslim people who can be citizens by citizenship law, but on the other hand, we are sure there are a lot of illegal Muslims from Bangladesh.
Today, in this part of Rakhine, you can see Rohingyas only as ghostly figures by the roadside.
There are Muslim Rohingya communities in Rau, but they're very tightly segregated. We've just been passing through one now. We've been followed by a police special branch. In fact, for most people, most foreigners visiting here, the Muslims may as well be invisible.
We did eventually shake off our police escort and found a group of Rohingyas working near the road. Talking to us was risky for them. We've concealed the identities of those who spoke. They described a life of constant restrictions and constant fear. They live far from the Bangladesh border. It would be a dangerous journey, and yet, even now, they think they too may eventually have to join the refugee exodus. Jonathan Head, BBC News, Rakhine State, Myanmar.
Now, President Trump has said he wants the Pentagon to organize a military parade. So we've been taking a look at how other countries do it, including the UK. Let's take a look.
And you've been watching Newsday on the BBC. Great to have you with us. I'm Rico Hizon in Singapore.
And before we go, let's take a look at some pictures, because in the last few minutes, the Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang has officially kicked off.